Happy International Scrapbook Day, everyone! This is Krystal, and I am so excited to be here on International Scrapbook Day to play along with all of the amazing challenges happening at the Hip Kit Club. Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about adding dimension to your pages. So this is going to be a bit of a longer video than normal because we've got a lot to talk about. So if you need to pause here and grab yourself a cozy beverage, I have a nice latte here to keep me energized through this process. Do so and come back, and then we're going to talk about lots of different ways that you can add dimension to your scrapbook pages. So I know that a lot of people shy away from dimension for various reasons. I used to be one of those people. All of my pages were very, very flat. I used to worry that it would add too much bulk to my albums or that they wouldn't fit into the page protectors. But eventually I realized how much I love adding dimension to a page and how much it really adds to the page itself. I recently had someone who had only ever seen my pages online, so they'd only ever seen just the images of them. They were at my house and were looking at the pages and commented on how different they looked in person because of all of the dimension that's there. That's just really hard to show in a flat photograph. So they just really add a lot to pages, and I want to encourage you all to try adding dimension to your pages if it's not something you already do, and if it is, then maybe you'll pick up some new tips on how you can add even more to your pages. So one of the great things about the Hip Kit Club kits is that they always have kind of built-in elements that add dimensions to your pages. Or that adds dimension to your pages. So in the most recent kit, in the April kit, there were these dimensional stickers from Dear Lizzie, which of course have lots of dimension to them. There were the tags from Horizon that also have dimension. And then there were the Sunny Days charms, which again adds another layer of dimension and texture to your page. If you remember back to March, there were the Sunny Days bows and the Simple Stories bow clips from Oh Happy Day, and then also the jewels from Doodlebug, all of which add lots of dimension to your page. And then back in February, we got the clips from Joyful Day and some dimensional layered stickers, which I've used a lot of already, and then also the brads from Cartabella. All of these things will easily add layers and dimension to your pages without really much effort. So we're going to talk about using some of these, but we're also going to talk about other ways that you can add dimension to your page. So one of the other ways that you can add dimension to your pages is by using mixed media. So this is a background that I created. I actually created it for the 100-day project, which you can find out more about on my Instagram, which is linked below. But I used the stencil from the April color kit, which is a Paige Evans designed stencil exclusive to Hip Kit Club, as well as the Lindy's Stamp Gang magical powders. So I used the teal one and the pink one, and I put modeling paste over the stencil and then added the color on top of it, and you can see the dimension that adds. So by doing mixed media, that's one way that you can add layers and dimension to your pages. Of course, another way of adding dimension to your page is through dimensional adhesive. So there are all kinds of different adhesives out there that will add dimension to a flat object. Just by adding a bit of foam behind it, it'll bring it up off the page. It also creates some shadowing behind those embellishments and just adds, again, that layer of interest and dimension to your page. Of course, there are lots of other ways to add dimension to your pages, and we're going to talk about those as we work through today's layout. So instead of going through each one individually, I'm going to show you how I incorporate them onto my page. So I have a photo here. It is a beach photo taken all the way back in 2013. So it's been a while, but it's one I've never documented, so I wanted to get it onto a page, and I just really loved the composition of this photo and the soft colors. I thought it would work really well in contrast with all of the brights that are in this kit. So I'm using the April Hip Kit Club kits. I have all of them out here in front of me, and I'm going to make a page with lots of dimension. Okay, so I am going to put you on fast forward, and then we're going to talk about all the different ways I add dimension to this page as we work through it. So as usual, I'm going to start with a sheet of white cardstock. This is white textured cardstock from Basil. It's from the April cardstock kit, and that's going to be my background for this page. The other thing that I knew I wanted to do was include that orange rosette from the Dear Lizzie layered embellishments. So I'm picking papers to go behind my photo that are going to help accent that orange piece. There isn't a lot of orange in this kit, so I want to be sure to use what there is just to make that embellishment make sense a little bit. So I know I want to use this navy blue paper directly behind my photo because I love the way that it contrasts with the light colors in the photo. And then I'm going to add this horizon paper. It's actually the other side of that navy blue paper with the orange flowers in it, again to bring in that orange color. And then I'm going to grab this embellishment, but I'm going to leave it on some packaging because I'm not exactly sure where I want to put it on my page yet. So I just cut a little piece of the plastic and added it behind it. I'm doing the same thing with this camera layered embellishment just because that gives me the ability to move it around the page as I work. The other thing that I know I want to do, I know I want to use this happy chipboard piece as my title. So I just put it on the back of my hand to remove a little bit of the adhesive. That way it doesn't stick completely and I can still move it around on the page as I'm working out my design. I'm doing the same thing with these kind of leaf chipboard embellishments. Just taking away a bit of the stick so that I can move them around. And then I'm finishing my title with some of these Heidi Swap thickers. These were from last month's kit, but I really loved how the colors played off of the colors that are in this month's kit. So I'm using that for the bottom half of my title, and then for the top word, the first word of my title, I'm just using these little puffy alpha stickers that came in the April kit. So once I have my title roughly on the page, I realize I definitely need to add more yellow behind my photo. So I'm just looking through the papers to find some papers with yellow in them and trying to decide which one I want to use behind the photo. This is the one I really want to use, but I hesitated because it's that gorgeous rainbow starburst on the back and I didn't really want to cut into it, but I have 2 sheets, so I'm going to go ahead and use that as one of my layers. But before I make the commitment to do that, I decide to use this other paper from Horizon with the kind of painterly splatches on it to create an additional layered embellishment. So this is one I'm creating on my own. I have this little envelope template that I've created for myself a long time ago. I just used a gift card envelope and some plastic packaging and traced around it so that I could create my own little envelope template. And I've just traced that onto the paper and now I'm cutting it out by hand. It's a super simple shape, so it's super easy to cut out. And then I'm going to grab it's actually a paper trimmer, but it has a scoring blade in it, so I can score the fold marks on this envelope before I fold it. So I'm just lining up the kind of flaps of the envelope and scoring the part I want to fold just to make it a little bit easier for me to fold. And then I will use a bone folder to crease the edges. And there I have a little envelope. So I'm just going to add a little bit of adhesive to the bottom flap to secure it together. And then I run my finger along the inside to make sure that the adhesive doesn't stick the whole thing together. So there's an actual pocket there, and just kind of rub away any extra adhesive that's there. So now I have a little DIY dimensional embellishment for my page, and I can add it to the embellishment clusters that I have going so far. I definitely want to put something inside of it. That's the whole point of having an envelope on the page, is that you can stick things inside. So I thought maybe one of these little 2x2 cards from the Horizon collection would work, but the ones that I found that worked with the colors on my page, if I tucked them inside the envelope, then the sentiment didn't show, and I couldn't really make them work. So I've set them aside for now, and I'm just going to think about what else I could possibly use there instead. And meanwhile, I'm going to add one of these bows from the Sunny Days collection. These were from the March kit, and I'm also looking at the other things that I have from the February kit, the things that I showed at the beginning of this video. I'm going to add a couple of these clips just because they worked so well with the colors that I had going on the page, and again, it adds just another layer and additional dimension to the page. So at this point I realized I still had the branding strip on my cardstock and I needed to trim that off. So I'm just going to pull everything off of the page and very carefully pick up all of these little stickers and then trim off that branding strip. While I do that, I realize that my page is looking a little bit blank, and it could use a little bit more color. So after I lay all these things back on, I realize I want to add another layer of paper, a border around my page. So I'm trying out a couple different papers from the April kit. I end up going with this one from Horizon with all of the different colored splotches on it. I felt like it really tied everything together really well. So I'm just going to take 1/2 inch off of 2 sides of my white cardstock, and then I'm going to gut that Horizon paper just because I don't want to waste any of it. It's just absolutely too gorgeous to waste. So I'm just going to use my trimmer to cut out the inside, and that way I can use that part of the paper on a future project. So once I have the inside of the paper cut out, then I can add the trimmed white cardstock on top of it, and it will give me just a colorful border around the edge. And I'm just going to lightly adhere that with some tape adhesive, and then I'm going to take out my sewing machine and sew around the entire edge. So I have my sewing machine loaded with some white thread, and I'm just going to use a regular straight stitch for part of it, and then about 1/3 of the way into each side I switch to a zigzag stitch and I back stitch over that, and then I finish off the side with a straight stitch. So I'm going to do that on all 4 sides. So I start with a straight stitch, then switch to a zigzag, back stitch over that, and then go forward with a straight stitch to finish out the side. So I'm just going to keep doing that. At one point my machine did run out of bobbin thread, so I had to stop and restitch one of the sides. But I just stitched right over the holes that I had already created before I realized that I was out of bobbin thread, and you can't really tell in the end that I had to stitch it twice. So once I'm all finished with that, I'm just going to trim the threads, and then I will pull them through the back and adhere them down with some washi tape. So I'm just pulling the front thread through to the back and then add a little bit of washi tape, and then I can cut away the excess. And you can see there I already had to do that with the first try sewing it. So there it is, all done. Once that is done, I can rough up the edges of this page, and this is another way to add texture and dimension to your page by roughing up the edges. So sewing, adding machine stitching or hand stitching is another way. Roughing up the edges, distressing the edges of your paper, that's another way to add texture and dimension that will add lots of interest to your pages. So now that I have all that done, I can start putting things back on the page, and I'm ready to finally cut into this Horizon paper that I've been so resistant to cut, but I think I really will add a lot to the layers behind my photo and just bring in that little bit of yellow that will tie in my title. So I'm starting with the photo. I added some foam adhesive. So like I said, another way to add some dimension to your page is to use foam adhesive. So I'm using some behind my photo, and then I'm going to add that blue piece, and behind that I'll use this yellow floral piece. So I just brought out my little trimmer to make sure that the edges were straight, and I'm adding everything on a slight angle, again just to bring some movement and interest to the page instead of having everything lined up perfectly. So there's just a tiny little border of this yellow paper behind the blue paper. And then I'm going to add another layer of foam adhesive behind this before I add the final paper layer behind my photo. So that's 2 layers of foam adhesive, adding lots of dimension behind my photo. I know there's going to be lots of dimension in all of the embellishments that I'm using, and I don't want the photo to get lost in all of that. So I want to make sure that the photo is popped up high enough that it can withstand all of the other dimension that's going to be on the page. So once I have that glued down, I can start to bring everything back onto the page. So I'm adding the title, and I'm overlapping those chipboard pieces a little bit. Again, it adds additional dimension to the page. It adds a bit more interest, and it makes it look like they belong together. They kind of fit together in that little spot. So adding the last word to my title in just the right spot. I fiddle with these little tiny letters a little bit to get them exactly where I want them. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring my sewing machine back up, and I'm going to sew through that title. So I'm going to just sew a straight stitch line through all 3 lines of the title. This again adds more texture and interest. It also helps make sure that those chipboard chipboard thickers stay on the page. If you have ever used them before, then you know that generally you're going to have to add additional adhesive of some kind to get them to stick. So sewing through them will make sure that they don't move around on the page as the years go on. So once I have all of those stitched, I can start to trim away the excess thread, but instead of pulling it through the back this time, I'm going to leave it on the front. So that will just, again, add some more interest to the page, a little bit more dimension or texture, that is, by having those strings kind of loosely just on the page around my title. So now I can start bringing all of the other embellishments back onto the page. I know pretty much where I want them, but I'm not ready to commit quite yet. I still want to be able to move them around as I work. So I'm leaving them on the backing plastic and not sticking anything down permanently yet. Okay, so I'm ready to start adding the final touches to my page. So I've grabbed the chipboard set from Horizon, and I'm going to add one of the pieces in that top cluster behind the rosette. That just adds another circular element. It adds, again, a little bit more dimension and just adds more of that blue color to that top cluster. And I went ahead and stuck down the rosette. I really like where it is. I'm happy with it, so I'm going to go with it. And then I'm just looking through the rest of the embellishments to see what else I can add to that top cluster. So it definitely needs something else. In the top left corner, I feel like it's got a little bit of an empty spot there, so I thought maybe this orange camera would work. It would add some more orange to the page, but not enough of it showed. You couldn't really see what it was once it was tucked back there, so I'm going to continue looking for something else I can add to that spot on the page. So I grab the die cut pack from Horizon, and eventually I find one of the little kind of postage stamp die cuts, and I think that will work perfectly. I also found this kind of world heart die cut that I think says something like favorite place, and I thought that will be perfect. It didn't work in that top cluster, but I'm definitely going to add it to the bottom one. Now I'm just looking through to see if there's anything else that I want to make sure makes it onto the page. I really like the way that postage stamp worked up there. It brought in more of that kind of periwinkle blue color to my layers, and it was the perfect size and shape to add to that cluster. So I added a couple photo corners to my photo, and now I'm going to use a tab punch and one of the Project Life cards to punch out a few tabs so that I can tuck them around my photo. I had some issues with my punch. It didn't want to go through the paper once I had punched the first one, so I just used my scissors to cut those out, and I'm only going to end up using one of those, that green one that I've tucked there at the top of my photo, and I've tucked it in between the layers, so it will stick up a little bit, and you'll see, just like I'm adding to this postage stamp, I'm going to add some foam adhesive just to one end of the embellishment, and that will make it kind of, it'll tuck in behind everything, but it will also stick up above the other layers on the end that's sticking outside of the cluster. So again, adding dimension and some interest to the page. So I have that top cluster pretty much the way I like it. I'm going to play with this bottom one now. So I definitely like this little heart tucked into the envelope. I think that's the perfect thing to add into that spot. I'm just working out exactly where it's going to sit and how it's all going to tuck together. So I'm adding that envelope in between the layers behind my photo, and then I'm going to add a little foam dot to the top flap of the envelope to make that stick up off of the page a little bit, and then I can tuck this little heart die cut in between those, the inside the envelope, and I'm using another little foam dot adhesive to make it stand up so it's not flat on the envelope either. And then I'm doing the same thing that I did at the top with this little leaf chipboard piece. I added a foam dot just to one end so that the bottom will tuck behind the envelope, but the top will have dimension behind it. And then I finally stuck down the little bow and the little camera dimensional piece as well. And so here's where I add a little bit of foam to the top of the tab that I added so that it will sit nicely on the page. And then I'm going to add one of these puffy stickers on top of the tab. Again, it's another kind of texture, another kind of dimension on the page. I'm just trying to get as much on this page as I possibly can. So it's time now to start adding the finishing touches. I really like the way the page has come together so far. I think it just needs a few more little bits and pieces to finish it off. So I went back to these Dear Lizzie layered embellishment pieces, and I've grabbed the 3 hearts that are on this sheet. I've tucked one at the top, and then there's a larger gold one. I've added it to that little gap next to my title, and the final little pink one in that same spot, just to fill up that space. And then I grabbed the epoxy hearts that were in last month's kit, and they're going to be the final perfect little touch to the page to finish it off. So they add a little bit of shine to the page. It's a different sort of texture than what's already on the page, and they just help fill in all those little spots. Now for a final touch, I'm going to do a little bit of mixed media. So I'm using the Lindy Stamp Gang Magical Powders. I've added some pink to a little palette, and I'm just adding a little bit of water just so I can add some splatters. I have kind of a diagonal design going on my page, and I'm just going to add splatters in that same diagonal line just to accentuate that and add a little bit more color to my background. So I'm going to cover my photo so I don't get any of the splatters on it, and then I'm just going to splatter some of the color in that diagonal line. And I'm using my brush to kind of force some larger dots in places where I want them. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other colors that came in this kit. I'm going to use all 3 of them. I'm just using a paper towel to dab up some of the extra water that was on the page. Since I don't have any gesso on my background, I don't want to leave too much water on the page. I don't want the page to warp. So just dabbing up a little bit of the extra water, and then I'm going to add some blue splatters in the exact same way. These Lindy Stamp Gang's Magical Powders, they have different pigment colors in them. So sometimes you can get a different color if you happen to pick it up on your brush like I did here. So I got a bit more of a teal color to add to the page instead of that kind of darker blue. That was just kind of a happy accident, but I was happy to add that additional pigment to my page. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the peach. So just picking up a bit of water with my brush, adding it to a tiny, tiny bit of these powdered pigments, and then splattering it on my page. So that is almost going to do it. So I pick up the page, and I'm going to show you the the dimension that's in the page closer to the camera so you can see more of what it would look like in person. But then I realized I totally forgot to add something that I wanted to, so I'll come back here in a second and add one last finishing touch to the page. So you can see here all of that dimension, all that interest that is added when you start adding dimension to your pages. It just adds just another layer of something extra to your page. So this is what I forgot. If you watched my unboxing video, I challenged myself to use one of these little charms on a scrapbook page this month. It's well outside of my comfort zone to use them, but I was determined to get it done, and I thought I could do it on this page, and then I totally forgot. So I had to come back and do it after I thought that I was done, and I added a little bit of twine. So that's another way to add dimension to your page, by adding ribbon and twine. And then I added a little pop dot behind this charm just to make it stand out a bit, and so that it didn't get lost up in that top cluster. And then that's going to do it for this page. So there are lots of close-up photos coming up. And I also want to talk to you about the challenge that's happening today at Hip Kit Club. So if you go over to our Hip Kit Club Facebook group, there's a link in the description below. I will be posting my challenge at 1 o'clock, and you may have guessed that the challenge will be to use dimension on your page. But if you want all of the specifics, you're going to have to go over to the Facebook group to learn more. So there will be a $10 gift card up for grabs during that time slot, and a few other gift cards as well for other game winners and other fun things. So you don't want to miss it. You don't have to be a Hip Kit Club subscriber to participate or join the group. There's lots of challenges happening all day long, both today and tomorrow, so you don't want to miss out on that fun. Of course, there's also the YouTube hop happening here. So if you leave a comment below telling me how you're spending your National Scrapbook Day and what crafty things you are getting up to this weekend, then you will be entered to win a $10 gift card from HipKit Club. So be sure to leave a comment below. And then the next stop on your hop is Nikki Rowland. Her page is also linked below, so don't miss that either. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you back here soon.